The hero who took his own medal. On late discovery of one's own lies. A hero was given a medal for a battle he had not in fact won. He had not exactly lost it either. The battle had been confused. It had taken place on a wide plain, in the second year of a war that had eventually been won by his country, in poor weather, in conditions that had made any clear account of the day impossible. The historians, in later years, would not agree on what had occurred. Some would say his regiment had held the line. Some would say the line had broken and reformed. Some would say there had been no line at all, only small clusters of men, in the fog, fighting other small clusters of men they could not, in the visibility of the day, fully identify. Men had died on both sides. The line had moved in his direction by an inch. Someone had to be honored. This was, in the country's tradition, important. The country needed heroes. It needed, after each engagement, to be able to point at a man and say, this was the one. The country had been on this battlefield in this campaign with 20,000 men. Of the 20,000, perhaps 3,000 had been killed. Perhaps another 3,000 had been wounded. Perhaps 14,000 had walked away in some condition of confusion. The country could not, in its honoring, point at the 14,000. The country needed to point at one. He had been the nearest to standing. This was, in essence, the criterion. He had been a young officer, 24 years old, who had been at the front of his regiment when the order to advance had been given. He had advanced. He had been, when the day ended, still on his feet. Most of his regiment had not been. The fact of his still standing, combined with his good family, his good education, his good handwriting in the field reports, and his general presentability for medal giving, had made him the choice. He had been given the medal in a ceremony in the capital 6 months after the battle. The king had pinned it on his chest. The crowd had cheered. The newspapers had published his face. He had given a small speech, prepared by an officer of higher rank, in which he had thanked his men, his country, and his God. The speech had been well received. He had been that evening the most famous young man in the country. He had worn the medal for 40 years. It had been in his life the central fact. He had been promoted on the strength of it. He had married on the strength of it, the daughter of a duke. He had been given, on retirement at 50, a country estate paid for by the gratitude of the nation. He had given speeches about the battle for 40 years. He had spoken at schools. He had spoken at military academies. He had spoken at the annual dinners of veterans' associations. He had written a memoir. The memoir had been a bestseller. It had been translated into 6 languages. It had been required reading in the country's schools for 2 generations. He had grown old in the certainty that he had won. This was, in some sense, the most uncomfortable fact of the matter. He had not, in his first years of wearing the medal, been certain. He had known, in his deepest places, that the battle had been confused, that he had been the nearest to standing rather than the most decisive, that the medal had been a country's need rather than his accomplishment. But the certainty had grown into him. By his 40th year, when he wrote the memoir, he had described the battle with such confidence that he had, in the writing, mostly convinced himself. By his 60th, when he gave his last public speech at a regimental dinner, he had been entirely convinced. He had been by then the hero of the battle in his own internal record. Late in his life, alone in the great hall of his country house, he took the medal off and looked at it. He was 72. His wife had died. His children were grown and lived in the capital. The country estate, which had been paid for by the gratitude of the nation, was very quiet. He had been spending in the last year most of his evenings in the great hall, sitting in a large chair by the fire with a glass of wine, looking at the portraits of his ancestors and the small collection of his own medals and ribbons that hung in a glass case on the wall. That evening, he had taken the medal off the case. He had not, in some years, worn it. He had only displayed it. He had taken it down that evening on a whim and held it in his palm. He looked at it for a long time. "I do not deserve you," he said. The medal was unmoved. It was a small gold disc, with the country's coat of arms on the front and his own name engraved on the back. It had been struck in the year of the battle. It was, by any objective measure, a fine medal. The workmanship was excellent. The gold was good, the engraving was clean. It was also, in its essence, simply a small disc of gold with words on it. It spoke. "I do not care," said the medal. The hero, who had not in his life been spoken to by an inanimate object, was surprised. He did not, however, drop the medal. He had been by his nature a man of composure. "I am gold," said the medal. "I do not know whose chest I have been on. I do not know what battle was fought. I do not know whether the line held or broke. I have been polished and worn and shown to children. I am as I was on the day I was struck. The deserving is your affair, not mine. The work is not to deserve me, the work is to take me off. You have known for 40 years that I should not be on you. The work is to put me down. After that, you may write a new memoir, or you may not. The medal is not the question. The medal has never been the question. You have been all your life the question." He sat with this for some time. "What about the speeches?" he said. The speeches were what they were. The young men who heard them at the schools, at the academies, were not on the whole harmed by them. They went on with their lives. Some of them became soldiers, some of them in their time won battles or did not. The country on the whole has benefited from the having of heroes, even imperfect ones. You did not in your speeches do permanent damage. Do not in your 72nd year magnify your guilt. The guilt is real, but it is small. The work, however, is to take me off. And if I take you off, you will be, for the first time since the day of the ceremony, simply yourself. You will be a man of 72 who was at a confused battle as a young officer, who did not particularly distinguish himself, who was honored for other reasons, who lived a long and reasonably honorable life on the strength of the honor, and who is now, in his old age, alone in his great hall with a glass of wine. That is who you are. It is not, in the country's records, who you are. But the country's records are not, in the end, what matters in this room tonight. What does matter? That you know. The hero put the medal in a drawer. He did this slowly. He held it for a long moment. He set it with a small ceremonial gesture that no one was there to witness in the small drawer of the side table beside the fire. He closed the drawer. He went back to his chair. He drank his wine. He never wore it again. He did not, in the 6 remaining years of his life, take it out of the drawer. He did not, in those 6 years, write a new memoir. He had considered, briefly in the months after the conversation, drafting a letter to the country in which he would set the record straight. He had not drafted the letter. He had understood, on reflection, that the setting of the record straight would be, in some way, another vanity, that he would be, in the writing of it, claiming the honor of the confession in place of the honor of the battle. He had set the project aside. He died in his sleep 6 years later. The obituaries called him the great hero of the battle. The country mourned. The funeral was a state funeral. The medal was placed back on his chest for the funeral by an officer of his old regiment who had taken it from the drawer in the great hall and had not, in the taking, asked any questions. No one knew. He had known. That had been enough. The medal does not care whose chest it is on. The deserving is your affair. The work is not to be worthy. The work is to take it off. You may be remembered as the wrong man. You will have knowns. The knowing is enough. The setting of the record straight is, in some sense, another vanity. The drawer is the right place. The state funeral may put the medal back on you. You will, by then, no longer be there to mind.